Hello and welcome to the third part of my video of the aftermarket radio installation in Subaru Outback and Legacy 2015, 16 and 17 models.
So I plugged in the battery.
In part 2, I removed the stock radio from my Subaru, installed the brackets and plugged in all the cables to the new aftermarket radio Atoto S8 Ultra. Now I am ready to start testing all features of the radio before I commit to mounting its components permanently and to finalizing the installation.
Radio will pick up my SIM card. There's a small SIM card slot here. I just need to use a small pin to open it. And it's a nano SIM card slot. So let's insert my SIM card in it. Hopefully I'm not going to drop it, because if I drop it, it's really hard to find a small piece like this in the car. Okay. Done. Okay, the moment of truth. Will it turn on? So the car is... Oh, look at that. Look at that. And it's unbelievable. It works. It works. The SIM card cards, however, we'll see. Let's turn on Wi-Fi and let's look at settings. Just regular Android settings, I'm guessing. So it picked up lots of different networks.
I was quite relieved to see that the radio is working. I immediately saw lots of available Wi-Fi networks and was quickly able to connect to my home network. At the same time, I was puzzled why my SIM card wasn't recognized by the radio. This particular model of the Atoto head unit is specifically designed to work with North American cellular networks, and I expected that it will see my SIM card right away. The solution turned out to be quite simple actually. All I had to do is to reboot the radio and the SIM card was immediately recognized.
And here we go. Okay, we got the 4G. So let me turn off my Wi-Fi for the moment and see, is there a browser in here? Data is working fine, and my Wi-Fi was just working fine. That's amazing.
Not only was I able to use my 4G connection to browse internet, but to my surprise, I was able to make phone calls and even send and receive text messages, all without using a phone. Amazing. Well done, Atoto. Other things I tested were the factory backup camera and the GPS signal.
Another issue which I found...
The backup camera did not work initially. Remember, I connected its cable to the wrong port in the Atoto head unit. But after moving the cable to the right port, the camera worked no problem.
There was no signal, and now the signal works fine. So what turned out, I plugged in my video input in the wrong port, and initially I plugged in the video signal in the port here which says V in, but there's specific port for the rear camera which says R in. It's a yellow port R in, so that's the one you're supposed to use, not the one which says V in.
The GPS worked with no issues the first time.
Go to Google Maps, and it shows my location on Google Maps, no problem.
There's also an option in the head unit settings that allows to monitor GPS satellites and the strength of their signal. The radio picked up the signal from a number of satellites, even with the GPS antenna being shoved under the dashboard for the time being.
But it is here anyway, so there's not much I can do about it. So both GLONASS and GPS work fine, no problem. So my USB
I
port,
also tested the factory USB port connection.
from my USB stick, which is plugged in right here in the USB port, and I can show you where is it? The file manager. So you see there's internal and USB-C. I have USB-C here. Not, I got pretty much everything.
And the AM/FM radio, which worked just fine.
Dans toutes les langues, c'est facile.
You can tune to FM and AM radio stations. You can see the RDS information. Not something I had in my manufacturer's default device.
Last but not least was testing the steering wheel control, or SWC. For the control interface to work, I needed to change the dip switch settings of the SWC interface according to the Crux interface manual. I chose Atoto for the dip switch settings of the radio. For the car model, Crux has two options, Subaru 1 and Subaru 2, without providing any additional information. I tested both options. Option 1 gave me access to all but two buttons on the steering wheel. Plus, minus, left, right, mute, source, voice assist, phone pickup and hang up buttons worked, while the menu and the return buttons did not. Option 2 enabled the menu and return buttons, but disabled some other buttons. In the end, I chose to stay with the option 1, which I felt was more functional.
Oh, perfect. So let's say my microphone. I'm going to test the external and internal microphone. So let's.
One other thing I forgot to mention was testing both the external and internal microphones. I won't go into details. Suffice to say that both worked. However, the quality of the microphone recordings was not that great. The external microphone provided a slightly better quality, but overall, it seems I will need to look into a better microphone in the future. After finishing testing all components, it was the time to route the external microphone and GPS antenna cables and to determine what would be the best location for the 4G and Wi-Fi antennas. I will start with the easy ones, the external microphone and the GPS antenna. I already decided to mount the microphone above the driver's side A-pillar and the GPS antenna on the windshield above the passenger side A-pillar. To route their cables, both A-pillar covers needed to be removed.
Let's route this way right now.
I will skip showing how the A-pillar plastic cover was removed. It's a very simple process of pulling the cover by hands to release its clips. A word of caution: an airbag is located behind the A-pillar cover. To avoid the airbag being deployed accidentally, do not forget to disconnect the negative power cable from the main battery. Another thing to remember is that the cable has to be routed behind the airbag so that the cable does not interfere with the airbag deployment in the case of a car accident. There's some factory cable going behind the airbag. I simply used zip ties to secure my cable to the factory cable. Another thing to mention is that it's going to be much easier to route the microphone cable if the instrument panel lower cover is removed. You don't need to remove it completely, just enough to give you access to the space under the instrument panel to pass the cable through. This is the final result of the external microphone being installed. Installation procedure for the GPS antenna was very similar. The GPS antenna cable was routed the same way on the passenger side A-pillar.
So I was able to route the GPS antenna.
Both the external mic and the GPS antenna are now installed. Their cables are properly routed and the A-pillar covers are put back in place. Now it was the most difficult part, to find the location for the Wi-Fi and the 4G antennas. The antennas are relatively long, and it was virtually impossible for me to find such long, flat spot under the dashboard to mount these antennas. A part of the problem was that there is no easy access under the dashboard without removing it completely, which was of course a no way for me. I could barely squeeze my hand around the opening of the center console, but most spaces there under the dashboard were either not flat enough or had lots of reinforcing ribs, which were in the way of mounting the antennas. A second constraint was that I did not want to mount the antennas in proximity to metal parts of the chassis to avoid any interference with the radio signals. As such, mounting the antennas under the A-pillars or deep inside the dashboard, such as in the space of the glove box compartment, was also not a solution. I wanted to find a clear, unobstructed location with no possibility for interference.
I'm not so keen on putting the antennas in some places which are very difficult to access, because in case if I need to remove them, it's going to be really a pain.
After struggling for a while, I decided to have a detailed look at the center speaker plastic grille. In my particular car, the space for the center speaker is empty, as I don't have an expensive Harman Kardon system, and the center speaker grille merely covers an empty space. It's a relatively flat piece located right at the top and in the center of the dashboard, away from the chassis and thus most likely free of interference. The thickness of the grille was just right to fit the antennas in, but the reinforcing ribs inside it would be in the way. Overall, the location seemed to be very promising if the ribs could be dealt with. My solution was to cut some of these reinforcing ribs off with wire cutters so that the antennas could be fit in. I decided that in the worst case scenario, if I happened to break the grille, I would only need to purchase this piece, which should not be that expensive. Another thought was that once antennas are glued to the grille, they themselves should provide additional reinforcement. So let's move on and see how this idea turned out.
Okay, so I got this piece here. Let's see if I'm able to install this antenna in here. You know what? Voila.
It seems cutting the ribs off the plastic center grille did the trick. One antenna fit perfectly inside it. So all I had to do is to cut some more ribs off to fit the other antenna, sand polish and clean the surface of the grille, and glue the two antennas in place.
So I decided to cut a few slots in here.
After cutting some more ribs and cleaning the surface from the debris, both antennas fit exactly inside the grille. I was quite happy. Before sticking them permanently to the grille with adhesive tape, I tested them by securing them with a small piece of electric tape and inserting the grille back in its place. Everything fit perfectly. Now it is time to permanently attach the antennas with the adhesive tape and to finish the installation.
So this is how it looks right now.
Just as a precaution, I decided to cover the antennas with some electric tape to avoid any damage by any protruding parts or components inside the center speaker grille compartment once I put the grille in place.
So this is what I ended up with. So I put two antennas together at the center speaker grille. Since I don't have the speaker, it turned out to be a perfect spot. All I needed to do is just to cut some slots. I didn't want to do it in the beginning, it's always scary to damage the part which you're not sure if it's going to work or not, or when you're not sure. But, it actually worked out quite nicely. And I'm going to put it in place and finish the installation.
After both antennas were installed, all that was left to do was to organize all cables in a more compact arrangement, so that they would not interfere with the moving parts and would not rattle behind in the moving car. I had to use lots of zip ties to make sure the cables were organized properly.
So let's plug in all the antennas. Oh, don't get stuck in there. Okay, Wi-Fi. Done. 4G. Actually, let's do the GPS first. The GPS on my phone is dying completely, so there's not much left to do. I am almost done. Okay, and finally the microphone. Okay, now let's shove all the pieces back. What have I done here? Oh, this is what I've done. I've actually cut this wire here. That's much better. Let's shove it. All this spider web of wires behind, and we're almost done. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Alright, so I'm going to plug in the battery and hopefully everything will work again, and I can start packing things up and closing the car and everything. Okay?
Once the battery was plugged in, I quickly checked that everything worked as it should and started the final assembly. From now on, it was putting everything back together, just in the reverse sequence. Securing the new radio with the screws, adding the faceplate to the radio, attaching the center vent grill, and the control center with its bezel.
Okay, it looks like everything's coming back together. Okay, this one works.
The final part was reinstalling the glove box assembly and the passenger side lower trim. Again, everything was done in the reverse sequence. First, reinstalling the back panel pocket and putting back all screws. Then, attaching the pocket assembly and the damper, and finally reattaching the ornament panel.
Alright, so finally everything's done, and I believe it was a success.
Finally, everything was done. The radio properly installed and all car components put back together. The new radio functioned the way it should. All its features have been tested. One thing that worried me was some noticeable flickering on the lowest brightness setting. It didn't bug me too much, since I never intended to use the radio at such a low setting. Another thing, as I mentioned previously, was inadequate quality of the microphone, which I will have to address later on. Overall, I felt the installation was a complete success. This is it, folks. I hope this instructional video was helpful to those who are looking to replace the stock radio with the aftermarket unit in their Subaru Outback or Legacy 2015, 16, or 17 models. Some additional required removal/installation instructions can be found in the compressed file with PDF diagrams in the link provided in the description to this video. Should you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below. With that, cheers everyone.
Yeah, it's quite a difference, right? So that's an old device. Maybe hard to see. That's an old device here.